Welcome to the Everyday Citizens Tactical Podcast, Episode 39, Tactical Medicine and Evolution. My name is Jeremy, and as always, I will be your host. Today I'm joined by Jay, better known as the Guerrilla Medic on Instagram. Jay served in the U.S. Navy as a corpsman and found his way through various levels of medicine on the civilian side, and is a big advocate of developing medical personnel in the citizen response and preparedness community. So, get your note-taking gear out and get ready to write as we dive into the world of tactical medicine.
Tell me turn it down and I'ma only turn up louder. Call me what you wanna, but you can't call me no coward. Strength in numbers, we the people, still the ones with power. Fighting fire with fire, time to take back what is ours. Tell me turn it down and I'ma only turn up louder. Call me what you wanna, but you can't call me no coward. Strength in numbers, we the people, still the ones with power. Fighting fire with fire, time to take back what is ours.
All right, welcome back to the podcast, everybody. And Guerrilla, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. Jay is just fine.
Jay is just fine. Less formal than Mr. Guerrilla.
Yeah.
Well, for everybody that doesn't know, Jay has his own podcast, the Guerrilla Medic podcast. So if you want to, man, go ahead and give a little backstory about yourself and kind of introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, we just did this offline. I'll do it again.
Yeah.
So I've been in healthcare some form or fashion for about 13 years, give or take. I got my start. I was finishing up a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, thinking I wanted to be a cop, and I had some elective credits left to do, so I went to a local EMT program and kind of jumped into the deep end of medicine with that. Most of the other students were, pre-med, nursing, stuff like that needed electives. And man, I didn't know the first thing about medicine. So that was a rough introduction, but I'm glad I did it that way. And then, like any intelligent person, I got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice and then enlisted into the Navy on the reserve side. So I did 6 years as a hospital corpsman on the reserve side. I was what is referred to as a quad zero or a blue side corpsman. Mm-hmm. So you've got your blue side, clinics, hospitals, things like that. And then you have your green side, CBs, Marines, special operations, stuff like that. So at the time I was pretty bummed I didn't get to go to field med school, but I really fell in love with clinic-based medicine. Mm-hmm. So did that for a while. And then I started working civilian clinics. I'm starting that side of my career. So I've spent the majority of my career in outpatient clinics, so urgent cares, pediatric family practice, stuff like that. I've worked in the ER of a level 1 trauma center for long enough. Place kind of eats your soul. Mm-hmm. But that was probably the best and worst job I've ever had, because you get to the volume, I think, is what helps any kind of medical provider at any level, is just seeing it constantly. Yeah. All the time. So I did that, and then I made the foolish decision of thinking that I could help organizations by moving up into leadership positions, and it's kind of what I do now. So I'm on the operations side, but it helps having worked the floor for so long and knowing what the problems actually are, and advocating for your teams.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more later, but medicine specifically is probably the most, probably the career that requires the most amount of experience to ever be proficient at your job. I mean, just hands-on patient experience absolutely makes or breaks a good medical professional.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think they call it practicing medicine for a reason. Like you're never going to be 100%, no matter how good you are, what equipment, diagnostics you've got. There's always that chance that it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. And that's why it's it's so important, specifically for our prepared citizenry side, and even the first responders that may work in slower areas, lower run volume areas, that are more on the field side, that you stay up on the continuing education and you really work scenario-based training, because you do not get that patient experience. You do not get that real-world decision-making experience on a normal basis. Most people will go their entire life first per se and never have to do CPR, but they've been CPR certified their entire life.
Yeah.
And you really don't understand, something as simple, as responding to a person down, as a standby citizen until you put hands on that patient. You feel those ribs crack. You assess that patient. You give directions for someone to call 911. Like, you just don't know how it actually goes until you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's your best teacher is those direct, patient care hours. But, if you're not doing this all the time, if you have a lower volume, ER that you work at, clinic, EMS, whatever, definitely, like you're saying, do as much scenario-based training as you can, ideally with people who have come from those backgrounds, because they were able to give you those little nuggets.
Yeah. So we're going to dive, just for the listeners, we're going to dive into kind of like big military, big clinical kind of conversation about a lot of kind of tactical medicine and then kind of the follow-on care that goes with that kind of stuff. That's the big focus for the day, is tactical medicine. So we're going to think big picture, big military, and then we're going to bring it down to the community level. And then obviously with Jay being, more focused in the clinical setting through his career, and then myself being on the field side, from the Marine Corps now to the fire paramedic side, definitely a good balance for the conversation, because, we working in the industry know that field care and clinical care themselves are two very diversely different places of patient care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's vastly different.
Yeah, they're vastly different, but we're, completely interconnected.
Oh, yeah.
It really has to be that amoeba. Like when I worked, doing level 1, you're getting helicopters in, you're getting, the worst of the worst. So being able to work with EMS, understanding where they're coming from, a lot of times, you'll get nurses that are pissed off that a line's not in. Like, he had a lot of shit going on, and maybe that wasn't something he was able to do. Maybe there's reasons. So instead of just being pissed off, try to understand where they're coming from.
Sure.
But I think the wisest thing I ever heard a senior corpsman tell me was, good medics get their patients to higher care. Great medics set their patients up for success at the next level.
Mm-hmm. And you can look at more so paramedic than EMT, but just field providers in general. Everybody has different styles of care and kind of tempo that they work at. I work at a very intense, very high tempo, field care perspective. I do not like sitting on scene, even if I have hands to do stuff. I am all about stabilizing en route and get them to higher care. Because 2 or 3 paramedics, in somebody's house with limited equipment, and even more so limited skills, does absolutely nothing when I can transport this person in maybe 8 minutes to at least a good general hospital where they'll have 10 nurses, 2 physicians, and respiratory come down from upstairs with unlimited supplies.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm big on getting people to higher care quickly.
Yeah, and when I teach BLS or like CPR classes, I'm very black and white about this. Like, we are the stopgap, if someone goes down in an urgent care or whatever, you're the stopgap until the medics show up with the ACLS drugs.
Mm-hmm.
They are the stopgap until you can get them to the hospital and then, cath lab or wherever they need to go.
Sure.
So
absolutely.
Everybody is working in tandem. And when you take that kind of tribal feral approach, it does nothing for the patient.
Mm-hmm. And like you said before, it's all, intertwined. Clinical cannot successfully, save and or care for long-term patients if there was, little to no field stabilization done for a patient. And whatever fields, life-saving, measures you might have taken before you actually transport, doesn't matter if there's no clinical, there's no higher care to actually take these people to. So both are just so intertwined.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess kind of, we talked about it before the show. I guess a big thing I kind of want to dive into first is just the evolution of tactical medicine, both from the field and the clinical side, that, we've learned over the last several years, specifically with the Russia-Ukraine war. But there's even other wars going on around the world where things can be learned. And it's just so vastly different from, almost 20 years of the global war on terror and everything that the United States practiced.
Yeah, it's, I frequently I'll talk to medics over in Ukraine through social media and whatnot, and it is worlds apart from what we did in GWAT for 20 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's there's no golden hour anymore. Mm-hmm. There's no Blackhawks coming with PJs and vents and blood. Like, I was talking to this one guy, and we can touch on it in a little bit. But as far as like evacuation care, mm-hmm. a lot of these guys are having to self-evacuate. Mm-hmm. Like, there's like litter teams are high value targets for drone operators. Mm-hmm. If there's more than 2 guys clumped up, you're just painting a huge bullseye on yourself. So a lot of stuff is changing. It's an interesting time for trauma medicine. But yeah, we can get into it.
Yeah. I think one of the big things that the field medics, in the Russia-Ukraine conflict have learned is that, at least from the GWAT perspective, what were field medics? What were the corpsmen? What were, the combat medics? They were stabilizers, and that was really it. Because, like you said, it used to be, our understanding was, we could evacuate casualties almost at any given point in time. Mm-hmm. Very few instances throughout GWAT where there are times where we weren't, evacuating casualties, very quickly. Whereas now, in the Ukraine-Russia war, medics on both sides, more so Ukraine because we have just more testimonies and insider looks mm-hmm. from the Ukraine perspective, is they're not only stabilizers in the field now, but they're now, long care professionals as well in the field, because they have to care for casualties for 4, 5, 6, 12 hours in the field. And you have to do so much more at that point other than just stabilize them for 20 minutes and then air evac them out of there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now they're really bridging that gap between nursing care and a mid-level provider. Mm-hmm. is really what it's coming down to, these medics having to do, and it's wild. But touching back on GWAT, like, we owned the skies. Mm-hmm. We could go anywhere we wanted, anytime. There wasn't shit all they could do about it. We could land a Blackhawk in your front yard. Mm-hmm. And, when we did actually have some, instances, the one that comes to mind is like that Adam Brown op from, I think he was with Dev Group. But they were taking, he got hit. And they were taking effective fire, having to transport him down this mountain. And they were taking effective fire the whole way. And they kind of guessed that the only reason they could do that is because, I think it was Taliban or Al-Qaeda, I don't remember who it was, but they must have gotten a hold of some nods. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, we're sitting there lighting up like Christmas trees with IR strobes and stuff, thinking that we own the night.
Yeah.
But, I mean, $30 Ring camera sees an IR now. Mm-hmm. So it's changing.
Yeah. And really you can see that at almost any conflict at this point, outside some just absolutely, poor African countries fighting poor African countries, is that the change in the individual, we'll just call them riflemen, fieldmen's abilities as far as night vision, thermal, drone usage, just all of that kind of stuff, changes everything, even all the way down to the medevac, CASEVAC level. Mm-hmm. I mean, drones, even if we gave the Taliban the drone capabilities that Ukraine has, in 2010, none of our helicopters would be safe.
No.
We would still have, fixed wing aircraft, supremacy, but we would not be able to just land Black Hawks wherever we want, and send in just endless gunship runs, because they just fly a $300 drone, into the propeller of, a helicopter or, some medevac that's sitting on someone's front yard, and it wouldn't be the same.
No, it's a much different animal now, and the really shitty part about it as a medic is, what to do. So when we look at this big picture, back in World War I, World War II, they did the best that they could. Paramedicine wasn't really a thing. They did the best that they could, but a lot of times the medicine and the science just wasn't there on what to do next.
Yeah.
So they could put, gauze, they could pack wounds and put a pressure dressing on, stab them with some morphine, and hope to get them to a surgeon. the problems now are that these guys know what they need to be doing. They just can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's going to play a huge role down the road with the mental health of these poor guys that know exactly what to do.
Mm-hmm.
They just can't do it because of the environment and the threats they're facing.
Yeah. And that's another thing, too, that probably does not get talked about enough, is the psychological effect, specifically on medics. Even when you think about it now, just, again, with the drones, how people maybe mangled differently now because of drones and the usage of cheap munitions, but also just constantly being targeted as medical personnel with stuff like, cheap drones and stuff like that for a long time we really didn't have to worry about. Medics obviously could still get shot at and stuff in Iraq and Afghanistan, but, more times than not, you're securing a large area, and the field medics have a little bit safer, more stabilized working area. Whereas now, unless you're in a building, if you're outside at all, you are a drone target, or a thermal target. A thermal target's a big one too. Lots of thermal designated marksmen on both sides of the conflict over there too.
Yeah, all these technologies, man, they cut both ways. Like, it's cool tech. I love to use it. Everybody wants to go out and buy the $10,000 fancy hat that sees in the dark, but man, everybody's got that now. Go to a Milsim West event. You are going to be humbled real quick by the amount of actually good SUT that's going on in the equipment they've got. Like, we run this event called Susk, and we lovingly call it the Tusk we have at home. But it's like a 48-hour scenario-based training event. We do it, once a year or whatever. The first time we did this was all the OPFOR guys were, either, some were prior service. Most were just, regular dudes. And there were very low tier, very young AFSOC guys that were there. Mm-hmm. So granted, they were kind of finishing their pipeline, and they haven't really done a lot, but the average OPFOR dude, the average citizen, was far better prepared than these guys. So that was kind of like a warming of your heart moment. And it's like, oh shit, these guys actually are squared away.
Oh, the civilian basis as a whole has come really a long way since, I'll say, 2020. Everything before 2020 really wasn't anything crazy. It was a step in the right direction. But since 2020, we're so much further than, battle belts and quality rifles, where equipment, technology, multiple weapon capability, support gear, you're looking at a lot of civilians, essentially equipping themselves like infantrymen. So it's crazy to see just the change in that side as well. But I digress.
Yeah, the equipment and the tactics are definitely worlds apart from 2020. I think the level of just general martial skill is the thing that I'm like, as an American, I'm like, hell yeah, brother.
Yeah.
2020, I would never hear someone say oh, before we go out and do this FTX, FTX, that wouldn't have been said. But, hey, we need to do an op ward. And it's like, oh, what now? But now that's commonplace.
Oh, yeah.
I love to see it.
Yeah. Getting back to the medicine side of things, we talked about air care. I want to talk a little bit about the ground care side of things a little bit, because essentially, from a lot of the documentaries and kind of insider looks I've watched on medicine in Ukraine and whatnot, they're not really using, at least from the front to the closest forward field care hospital, or more formal CCPs, they're not using any type of actual medical vehicles, for the most part, transporting any patients. A lot of the stuff I've seen is just a large van or a pickup truck. They're throwing dudes, in there, and then you're just drone dodging 2 miles off the front until you get to a somewhat secure position.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what I've seen. And from guys I've talked to, it's pretty much just get any available vehicle you can and load and go. Sometimes they'll take a van or whatever and kind of try to convert it a little bit.
Yeah.
But, for the most part, they're just, they're treating with diesel and just getting them the hell out of there.
Euromed did a really good post, I think, towards the end of 2023, over transforming your standard cargo van or like passenger van into like a small, essentially a small field ambulance in a sense, an auxiliary field ambulance. And, us working in the industry and stuff like this, whether you're military side, civilian side, we're used to having an ambulance with hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment on it that's built for medicine. Or on the green side of things, having a bird that is built for medicine, or some sort of field ambulance where you can neatly stack, multiple tiers of patients on field stretchers while providing care. Like, we're used to that kind of stuff, but I don't really know like what we're doing on the green side now, as far as what corpsmen and combat medics are doing, but I hope that they are changing how those guys practice field medicine now to something what unfortunately will be more realistic, or at least exposing them to it. I don't know if you have any knowledge or experience with that, with what they're doing now.
I don't. When my contract was up, it was the beginning of 2020, and I could see the writing on the wall with how that was going.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And I just got the hell out as fast as I could.
I don't blame you. I also got out in 2020.
So I know as I was getting out, they pretty much didn't care about TCCC for the corpsman, and they were pushing almost entirely prolonged casualty care.
Well, I mean, I guess that's at least somewhat beneficial.
Yeah, I think they were, anticipating these peer-v-peer conflicts, and, instead of, just kind of jerking off for the drill weekend or whatever, the nurse corps officers that were, ICU or ER nurses, they were putting on, hip pocket trainings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, getting to learn from them. So I think it was going in the right direction, but as far as where they're at right now, your guess is as good as mine.
Sure. A big thing with like how the mindset and the practice for field medics have changed, in the European theater. I have not seen a lot of videos, at least not good videos, that have outlined like, what a frontline medic may actually be carrying with him. But from the mindset change from just stabilize a patient and transport to now stabilize and nurse this patient, there's really just no way around the fact that you can't carry enough gear to effectively nurse people for 12 to 24 hours in a forward field environment. You can't carry enough fluids. You can't carry enough medications. Oxygen. I think you and I have talked about it in our Instagram DMs before. Oxygen is such a big part of, clinical care specifically. But on the front, like, you're not carrying, right? You don't have the ability to just free flow, 10, 15 LPMs of oxygen to these people.
Right. Yeah. And some of these guys I've talked to have kind of, I kind of asked one of them, I'm like, is TCCC still relevant?
Yeah.
And they're like, yes, it's relevant, but it needs to change.
Yeah.
So kind of getting to what you're talking about with like, carrying enough. If they're doing any intervention, they're just a target. Like ventilation is out.
Yeah.
If you have to ventilate a patient, if you have to crike a patient, they're just expectant.
Yeah.
This one guy, I don't know if he wants to be named, so I'll leave him out. But he was talking about the need for a bifurcation of the medic role. So you would have, your regular line medic, but what he's really doing is just stopping bleeding and pushing 2 grams of TXA as an IV push and getting him the hell out. And those other medics are going to be at, one of those kind of forward operating, forward surgical suites. And those guys need to be trained up to basically be a PA, because those are the guys that are doing blood. Those are the guys that are going to be, doing an ET tube, doing all the meds that are associated with that. Vent management, that's where you're doing it. And it's usually at like an underground clinic somewhere to help protect from drones.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of stuff about how most, forward clinics or, CCPs aren't even above ground inside buildings. Like, they have to be in basements. They have to be undergrounds, not just to protect from drones, but mortars and artillery. That's, essentially just absolutely constant.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the, the standard IFAC, it's got like a pack of quick lock combat guys. Like, bro just got half his leg blown off by artillery.
Yeah.
Like, we need like 10 of these.
Yeah.
So if that's your threat model, man, your packing has to change.
I think about that a lot, and I've talked about it with various medical personnel before, from the tactical side. And I think the civilian side has grown very much to ensuring that they carry full-size IFAKs. Obviously, the military always has issued IFAKs, that are to spec. But the civilian side, for a lot of like pre-2020, micro IFAKs were a thing. One chest seal, one compact gauze, compact pressure dressing, one pair of gloves, and then like a tourniquet, and like that was it. But now, again, we talk about towards moving more towards a true American rifleman loadout and all that kind of stuff. Even now, with a full IFAK, a full conventional IFAK, multiple pieces of gauze, big full-size trauma dressing, needle D, NPA, like the whole shebang. Like you said, like if injuries are severe enough, there's just not enough even on that person to properly care for them, but they're not gone yet. They're not dead. And it kind of comes down to, because it was always kind of frowned upon for field medics to carry a bunch of trauma supplies, basically being walking boo-boo stations. Because, people are always like, your medic is supposed to carry everything that you don't carry. But it really doesn't matter how much, say lactated ringers, TXA, like any of that I carry. If I can't properly wound pack something or, do a lot of this basic stuff, it really doesn't matter how much ALS equipment I carry.
Yeah, because you skipped the BLS portion.
Yeah, BLS always before ALS.
But I did a write-up over on my website a while back, but it was, the concept was of cross-loading. Because, what you're getting at, I can't carry all of that plus my sustainment load.
Yeah.
Like that med bag's going to be 45 pounds if I carry everything plus my sustainment load of, whatever, 35, weather dependent with how much water I need to bring. That's not including ammo, chest rig, all that. But I mean, if you've got 12 dudes and each of them's carrying 2 things of gauze and you cross load 8, you're now at 30 plus packs of gauze. Like, it sounds ridiculous. Like, and if you don't have context with it, you're going to be like, oh my God, that is so much crap. Why would you need that? And I'm like, the situation where this would be relevant to you, man, helicopters are not coming with fancy dudes and cries. Like, it's on you. So 30 plus packs of gauze, we're looking at like 16 plus tourniquets, it's a lot of crap. And if you don't cross load as a medic, you're not going to be mobile, and you're just going to be slow. And, now you're opening yourself up to just either CAS out or be so slow you're going to get tagged.
Yeah. I have played around with the idea of creating a basically what I kind of call the team sustainment kits. And I probably shouldn't talk about it because someone's going to go freaking copy it now or something if it's a good idea. But essentially it is a what's it called when you suck all the air out of plastic?
Vacuum seal. Yeah,
vacuum seal. This is the third podcast that I forgot about that. So it's a vacuum sealed package, but essentially it's to be carried at the fire team level. So at least one individual per fire team carries it. And it is the extension of the personal IFAK to care for up to 2 people. And essentially it's all focused around BLS. Additional chest seals, additional gauze, tourniquets, all of the BLS supplies that a medic will need outside of your personal IFAK to care for a lot more, larger span of wounds or just large wounds in general without the medic having to carry it. And it would be like the size of a lunchbox or so, but just like one guy on a team may always be tasked with, carrying extra ammo for the gunner. And, one guy might be carrying a quick litter or 2 or extra batteries or something for the radio operator. One guy per fire team can carry a vacuum sealed, essentially, IFAK extension that can be given to that squad or platoon medic to care for guys when they go down. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I'm all about that. The way that me and my guys have kind of done it is I designate everybody, unless you're like a DMR, a gunner, an RTO, something like that, and you've already got the extra crap to schlep. But if you don't have that specialized role, I've got, let's say, a couple bleeder guys. I've got an airway guy, a respirations guy, circulation, your hypothermia, an ortho guy. Mm-hmm. And they're each going to carry a little bit more. None of it's super heavy.
Yeah.
But, an extra, bleeder kit, which for me is like 2 pressure dressings, 4 packs of gauze. Mm-hmm. So if I need that extra, hey, you come here, you're a bleeder guy. You look at your risk coach, who's what. You come here, and I need the crap you're carrying. Mm-hmm. But yeah, cross-loading, man, is the only way I see to carry the stuff that you're potentially going to need.
Yeah.
Because these scenarios that, we would look at, even, some kind of a Kona scenario with a breakdown of society or whatever, you're it, man. Mm-hmm. You're it.
Fluids is another big hard thing too for medics, because if you can control a bleed, which pretty much for everything except for an intracranial bleed and any type of interthoracic non-open bleed, bleeding can be stopped in the field. But if you've lost, from our listeners that don't know, if you've lost too much blood, you need fluid replacement. Everybody that works in the medical field knows blood is best. Lactated ringers is okay. Saline is not ideal at all for blood loss. But, you can't carry... One, a lot of field medics... I actually don't know of any actual, military field medics, unless they're probably more a special operations guy, and it's a lot more short-term. I don't know any medics that are just carrying around blood in the field.
So we don't carry blood, but I carry blood bags and the kits to do so. So one of the requirements for us is I don't trust the blood type you tell me you are. You need to show me from a CLIA lab certified blood document. Mm-hmm. So you just do, LabCorp orders without a doctor, and it's like $20 to get an actual blood type. Mm-hmm. Then I take that goes in the crew medical records, and you get added to the blood roster. Mm-hmm. So on that risk coach, so I keep a copy of the blood roster on a risk coach, and I keep a copy with the blood. Mm-hmm. So I know who's compatible with who, and I've seen guys do it, but I don't think it's applicable for most civilian groups to have like a cooler with blood.
Yeah.
It doesn't store well. It doesn't store for very long. Now you're having to hump a cooler out into the field. Mm-hmm. So fresh whole blood transfusion is the next best thing. Mm-hmm. And once you have that blood roster and, you get on the radio and say, Rolo, for that range of Olo titer blood. So I know I've designated whoever's O-neg, or O-pos. If I say Rolo, number, whatever, 37, get over here. He knows he has a blood bag either on him or under the front plate, and he pulls that out, and my CLS guy is drawing a unit off of him, and I'm prepping the recipient. So if that's something that you guys, most of the stuff in my podcast I try to talk about is pretty much just like anyone off the street. Mm-hmm. I try to do this for everybody. Blood is where I get a little hinky. And I'm like, if you can do it, I would really like that Army 68 Whiskey, Navy Corpsman, RN, paramedic level or higher to do that, because there's a lot of shit that can go wrong.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be very carefully overseen. And a lot of things can go wrong. And there's actually a lot that's come out from the research side about, some safer practices and whatnot with blood transfusions, and maybe the side effects we once thought about being really bad aren't as bad. But yeah, you're right. It needs to be overseen by, paramedic or military equivalent or higher. I would definitely not trust, some guy you essentially spun up to a CLS level to just do it by themselves.
Yeah, that would be like the last resort. Like if I'm hit and I'm, dying or something in some wild Tarkov scenario. Like, yeah, I've shown all my guys how to start a line. Like they can all start a line. I'm fine with that. It's just the what can go wrong with it. Like, do we have Benadryl? Do we have all the other stuff that may be a problem if we screw this up? But yeah, I don't expect that from your average group. That's a higher level thing. If you could do it, awesome. Yeah. But that should be a last resort that you're doing.
North American Rescue sells, in the retrospect of medical equipment, a fairly affordable field transfusion kit. Mm-hmm. Definitely worth having some. it's just, and I've talked about it with, you know, my most senior medical guy, which was a Army medic as well. You know, field transfusions, even in the actual field, even that is like a last kind of resort type thing. If you're at a more well-established CCP, not even like a field hospital or clinical setting, but just even a well-established CCP, you know, maybe, sure, but there's just so much that kind of comes with, you know, taking blood in the field. It has its pros and its cons. The downside is, you know, I'm taking, you know, maybe a liter of blood from somebody that's actively working in the field.
Right. And that's,
and they've got to come off the line now for, I mean, it takes anywhere from 48 to 96 hours to truly replace blood in the body naturally.
I don't even think you're supposed to donate more than once every 8 weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
For so it to fully replenish. Yeah. That's the issue that I run into with, you know, carrying blood. Mm-hmm. It's not something I've quite figured out. You know, when you have, you know, your soft medic go and he pulls some units from the blood bank and puts them in the cooler and takes them out. That's one thing. Like, you have a whole logistics train and an entire army to support that. But for us, I haven't figured it out, and I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze.
Really, if you were to at least either A, run blood to the front, or take blood with you to the front, whatever the front is. And this is all very vague to speak about for everybody that's listening. You know, we could talk hours about whatever the front is. That's a whole conversation. Mm-hmm. But really, you have to pull from just support personnel really strictly. I mean, I would just be so hesitant to pull from guys that are, you know, maybe standing security at your CCP, or, you know, somebody else that's just happens to be a couple, you know, trenches or, you know, MG pits over. You just be like, hey, come give me a liter of blood real quick. And if you get hit, like, now you're really screwed. Yeah. So, I mean, really, I think a big thing to do with that is, if you're an organization, and we're speaking non-military at this sense, but if you're an organization that's big enough, you know, looking at, you know, your support personnel that are in the rear, guys working supply and logistics, you know, guys maybe that are even working in the clinical setting, you know, other various volunteers, getting them to donate blood that aren't going to be expected to go to the front right away, or into direct contact, and then sending blood forward to some sort of CCP. That's a big thing that we've kind of talked about, is that so much more focus from kind of the guerrilla side, the community response side, needs to focus around less about direct field medic intervention and more about supporting second tier kind of CCPs, and really putting that into the planning. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I think that's, you know, balancing your limited medical personnel as well as infrastructure and equipment. It's probably a lot better than trying to put a lot of this onto a field medic in the field.
Yeah, I don't, you know, and it really depends on what the old adage of MedTC, like, what's going on? Like, are we fighting Chinese paratroopers? Is this like a local, you know, everything's disrupted, no one's going to work, there's, you know, roving bands of hooligans or whatever that the town is now fighting off? You know, if it's something like that, then, you know, maybe you establish a walking blood bank roster. Mm-hmm. But even that, you know, 20 people, let's say, for 20 units, that's 20 Eldon cards you're going to need. Mm-hmm. That's, you know, if it's within the crew, like, I'm fine with that, because, you know, generally they're healthy. I don't have to worry about STDs. They're all married guys.
Sure.
Faithful married guys, thankfully. Yep. But if I'm just drawing off of community members, man, I work in this community. I know how dirty some of these people are. Like,
oh yeah,
now you're gonna need like disease screening, and you're gonna need the hospital to be on board to run those. It's when you start thinking about it, man, it gets, you know, mind blowing, the amount of logistics that just getting a unit of blood up to insert whatever front you're going to. Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything that went into just that one unit.
The whole disease side of things is something we didn't even touch on, but that's also extremely important. Even within, you know, let's say a larger community organization itself. Let's say you're a 30-man community organization and the balloon goes up. Now you're a 120-man organization because you have a bunch of, you know, good community members that stepped up to volunteer. but you don't really know a lot of these people that might have stepped up to volunteer. And if you don't have, like we talked about, that hospital setting to screen a lot of this kind of stuff, if we're talking about blood transfusions, like some random guy that, volunteered 8 weeks ago, stepping forward to give blood, I don't know what his medical history is like. Most people don't even know what their medical history is like, if it wasn't for a hospital regurgitating it to them every time they go to the doctor.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, you're right, there's a lot of risk that comes with that. And again, it comes down to, is the juice worth the squeeze? Yeah, I might save this guy, but now
he's got hepatitis, and now
he's got hepatitis and 12 weeks of rehab to go through. So it's kind of like, what am I really doing to these people? So
yeah, that's why I'm a fan of doing an Eldon card on your family members. Because I'm
gonna do that for Christmas gifts this year. That's a stocking stuffer right there.
Do it. I'm all about that.
I'm doing that.
I just did it on my in-laws a couple weeks ago.
Very good.
And they're like, "Oh, you can do that?" And I was like, "Yeah, come here." Poke the finger, and away we go. But I mean, if everybody gets, family, mom, dad, mother-in-law, father-in-law, you're now expanding that pool of known people. Mm-hmm. So yeah, blood is a huge problem. It's a huge problem for any type of civilian response to, open warfare or collapse or anything like that. It's a huge problem over there. Like, they can't keep blood coolers going because those generators put off a ton of heat and enter your thermal drone.
This is where kind of something like, if the logistics is there, fluids like lactated ringers come in. Again, not as good as blood by any means. But if we're talking about at least the temporary stabilization and care of patients, even from the field to the clinical setting, if you can stabilize a patient for 96 hours through something a little better like ringers and get them to that window in a clinical setting where they can then start replacing their own blood, you can give them food, water, they're starting to get a little healthy. It's harder, but you can get to that point. But something like ringer,
you don't have to deal with the logistics nightmare of blood.
Yeah. Now, a lot of the military side doesn't like ringers and saline as much because they've always had blood and they've had the logistics around it. But like field paramedics for like the civilian side, ringers on the trauma side, depending on where you go to, there's some pockets of the country that don't like it. Obviously the big thing about EMS paramedicine is that your protocols very much different from region to region, and whatever that physician that writes your protocols strongly believes in. But a lot of paramedics on the EMS side use ringers in trauma victims. If they're good enough medic to actually try to stabilize vitals and keep perfusion going. Ringers is a good thing. That's a lot more beneficial than normal saline for keeping that perfusion going, and that's what we're looking for when we're talking about fluid replacement is maintaining perfusion through transport until we get to that clinical setting.
Yeah, I think ringers are, at least where I'm at, they are generally preferred for most things. So like when we pack, I'll carry a liter of ringers. And then 2 or 3 other guys, depending on time of year, like if we're worried about heat casualties and stuff, it's either one additional unit or one additional liter or, 2 or 3 if we're going to do, a tough mountain hike and it's 90 degrees out. Yeah, that's part of the planning. Like, we're very likely going to have to be administering some of this if guys don't stay on top of their hydration.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is lactated ringers, is useful for more than just trauma, because even in the even on the tactical setting, you have things like heat exhaustion and dehydration and all that kind of stuff where a lot of that comes into play. So it's definitely used in a lot of different things. Normal saline, this is just my personal take on it, and I am nothing more than a paramedic for everybody that's listening. Normal saline in very small doses to trauma patients who have been, that you can confirm bleeding has been stopped and or to a point of what you would consider stabilized in small doses is not bad to help with perfusion. I think where normal saline gets a lot of bad rep on from the physician side, overseeing a lot of paramedics and, field medics and all that kind of stuff, is that while, yeah, it's not, chemically the best for the patient compared to ringers or blood, is that for the longest time, specifically paramedics, they were just flooding patients with saline, trauma patients.
Yeah, that was the problem.
It's like your patient didn't need 2,000, mLs of saline because their blood pressure was low. They probably could have done with 500 and perfused perfectly fine until they got to the hospital. But people were just bringing in, dual large bore IVs, 1,000 bags wide open, and that's what was hurting people.
Yeah, they were just flooding patients and then just making it a nightmare when they went upstairs.
Yeah, oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that used to be the standard of care. Like looking back at like NSW and all these guys that kind of pioneered TCCC, 2 large bore IVs and 2 liters, just run them wide open.
It's just ridiculous.
That's just that's what we did. But we've kind of advanced since then.
Advanced since then.
At least we know why it's not great.
Yeah. Personal preference is that if they need more than 1,000 mLs, 1 liter of fluids, saline is not the option, and you need to find other ways to stabilize them until they get to a clinical setting. 1,000 or less, you can more than likely get away with. More than likely. My personal preference, if you have a, let's say a gunshot wound patient, and we've got a blood pressure down to, say, 80/55, you get a line in, 500 mLs of saline, you bring them up to, a little over 90. We're perfusing good. Keep them there. We're not trying to bring blood pressure back to 120/80. We're trying to just maintain perfusion.
Yeah. And I know a lot of agencies will still do like permissive hypotension so that they're not blowing out their clots.
Yeah.
I think
that was another big thing. Clots. Blown out clots. That was another big thing, again, with people flooding patients.
Yeah. I think I saw a video, my buddy sent me a video recently of like a Russian medic, I think, and he was doing that, 2 large bores each AC and just blasting them with 2 liters. And I'm like, so Russian medicine hasn't evolved. Okay. Noted.
Yeah. Russian medicine is essentially, from everything I've gathered,
Russian medicine is we have another dude.
We have more conscripts.
Yeah.
It seems like their field medicine literally is about 10 to 15 years behind the United States and NATO.
Which I don't understand, because all of these like TCCC algorithms, prolonged casualty care, like, they can go and get a subscription to Joint Special Operations Medicine and read the articles. Yeah. I don't understand why they're not, maybe it really is like we just have another guy and it's cheaper. I don't know.
I think a big thing to do with it is logistics. Obviously the IFACs of, even your standard, Russian service member is not good compared to, a U.S. Marine, British Marine, anything like that. And that and sanctions and everything that really hits those countries hard. Like Russia does not have wide availability to purchase things like CAT or soft T tourniquets. And that's a big thing that I think the community did not understand as a whole when this war started, when they were judging like all of the medical equipment they see Russians use. And it's like that country has been under sanctions for a long time. And I'm sure there's some level of agreements with like companies like North American Rescue and stuff where it's like you don't sell to certain countries or you sell a limited amount. Sure of it.
Yeah.
It's not like Russia can just, place an order for,
2 million
10 pallets of tourniquets. It's just not reality.
Yeah. And I wonder if, as a people, I think Russians have a much higher tolerance of death than Western countries.
Oh yeah. 100%.
Like for us, I think, what was the SGLI? It was like $500,000 for each of our life insurance or something like that. Like they insured us. They put us through a bunch of training. They gave us the equipment, more or less.
Yeah.
And I think there's a higher a higher importance placed on the life of the average soldier or Marine
Mm-hmm.
than they're willing to do.
I think the Russian equivalent of that, I read like back in 2023, was that the payout for like a Russian soldier that dies was like 40,000 US equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
So far less. Obviously, the cost of living and everything is different, but
Sure.
Much less. Plus,
Yeah.
we have the higher, as shitty as the VA is, there's a lot more resources and stuff for veterans, especially those that have been injured,
Mm-hmm.
In combats compared to really even most countries. A lot of people think that NATO is up to speed like the U.S. is, and that they're all just little mini U.S. equivalents, and that is far from the truth.
Yeah.
France, somewhat Britain, and even Britain's military is very much falling behind. And Germany's starting to pick up, but all these other countries, nowhere near tier of the United States on any front. Medical equipment, like just it's not even comparable.
Yeah, I think for all its faults and shortcomings, I still think that the U.S. military is by far the dominant fighting force in the world that the world has ever seen. For multiple reasons, we've had a pretty shitty last 4 years. Like if you're a DoD member, God bless you. My hat's off to you. That's a rough 4 years. But today my buddy sent me this thing about like the personal electronics policy for the Marine Corps. And they did it as like a badass video where this Marine is like wounded running through the woods and holes up in this building, and he gets on his phone and starts texting where his coordinates are, and he gets a hellfire directed at him. And I'm like, holy shit! Like even the safety briefs, those even look fucking cool now.
Mm-hmm. Dude, I just said it the other day because the Marine Corps has been doing their the 03 series videos for the month or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Social media and everything for the military, specifically the Marine Corps, has changed to essentially be the equivalent of the civilian 2A community. The styles of videos that they take, the pictures that they take, like it's all changed.
Yeah, they self-neutered for 4+ years, and now they're like, holy shit, we're running our mouth and we're running out of recruits.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when something happens, like they're not going to Portland and looking for some blue-haired barista to go fight in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm. They're
going to Arkansas and looking for the good old boy. Like that's always been the backbone of the U.S. military.
Yeah. So I kind of want to change over the conversation here and start talking about the Minuteman medic, the Guerrilla Medic, the community group volunteer side of things. Because obviously, and we've talked about it a little bit here, kind of taking side topics off of bigger conversation, but being a medic for say a 20-man community volunteer group is vastly different than being a corpsman or a field or a combat medic in a conventional like rifle platoon or something like that in the military. Like it's very different. You have no resources, no higher guidance, the limited logistics to the absolute maximum. So I really want to dive into this and hopefully give some inspiration and some guidance to those guys, in the community groups that are trying to get those kinds of things squared away, because the medical side is really hard.
Yeah, it definitely is. And any kind of civilian, whether it's a volunteer group, a group of guys that get together and have plans for if the lights go out. Like, man, it is worlds apart from what I did in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I did some fairly cool field exercises. They sucked at the time, how it is. But like looking back, it was cool.
Mm-hmm.
Like erecting field hospitals in the middle of nowhere. Like, what goes into making a field hospital, the logistics that go into it,
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's so much different for civilians. And I think the cool part is it's all up to you. Like that's a double-edged sword, but it's up to you. If you want to go out and learn how to do something, there's no handcuffs on you.
Yeah.
Civilian medicine is so, and I hate it. And that's one of the reasons that I started that podcast. I hate the gatekeeping of civilian medicine so much.
Mm-hmm.
You aren't X title. You don't get to learn this. when I was in, it's so fucking frustrating.
Oh, I know. It's silly.
And I've seen it throughout my entire career in the civilian world, regardless of, getting better licensure, higher licensure and stuff. In the Navy, it was just, hey, I'm doing something cool. Do you want to come see how to do this and help? Mm-hmm. And then eventually you're doing it on your own. It was competency based.
Yeah.
And that's what I love.
The biggest challenge I think a lot of these groups face is finding personnel in general. Because one medic, I won't say it does you nothing, but one medic doesn't exactly do a lot. Medicine is very much a team aspect. Whether that's one medic in the field and one guy with a few assistants, kind of off to the rear to do handoff to maybe in a grander scheme of things, hand off to some sort of EMS unit or just take to the hospital themselves. Or, it's like we talked about earlier. It's a very multi-tiered system that's very intertwined. So if you're a group that has one guy that's maybe like a former corpsman or something, like that's great, awesome. He could probably spin you guys up on some really good basic march stuff. But as far as doing a really efficient medical care, you really have nothing.
Yeah, and I think...
And that's dark, but that's the truth.
Yeah, and I think there's two things that come to mind when you talk about that. The first is you have to make friends. Mm-hmm. Like, you got to get off of social media. You have to go and meet people. It is so much easier to befriend a nurse or a physician assistant or a nurse practitioner or a doctor than to try to replicate that. Mm-hmm. They have spent probably the majority of their adult life going to school, learning these skills, countless hands-on patient hours. Like that's really tough to replicate. Mm-hmm. And the second thing I think is the quiet. This is like saying the quiet part out loud. Mm-hmm. Let's say you do have, a corpsman in your group. If that's all you have, and you guys are going to go out and do spicy Tarkov shopping or, whatever the scenario is, that guy, and this is my opinion, that guy needs to sit his ass in the clinic. Mm-hmm. He should not be going out into the field, because if he gets tagged, you have nothing left for the guys they're going to bring back. Mm-hmm. That's where you need to spin up, your CLS guys, and they need to be the ones to do this point of injury care and bring them back. Mm-hmm. Because just getting them back to the clinic, honestly, that's the easy part.
Yeah.
Nursing skills and making sure that they pull through, holy shit, that is so much harder.
Yeah. Even just getting guys, your general rifleman, your radio operator, whatever, getting them to learn how to take a proper set of full vitals. Mm-hmm. If you're not having those guys do that, like at least once a month, if not every other month, they're not going to be able to maintain it. And a lot of them still aren't going to be able to figure it out from there. Teaching people who have zero experience how to take a manual blood pressure and saying, all right, we'll revisit this on the training schedule in 6 months because we have so much else to cover. That's just, it's wishful thinking. It's not super effective. You need medical personnel.
Yeah. And they need to, not just take the blood pressure, but, if you've got a lot of shit going on, you've got a bunch of patients and you're like, hey, I need you to go get vitals over there. They need to know what normal is and what critical is.
Yeah.
Because if you're just like, hey, the blood pressure's fine, I'm less worried about that if I know you can do the skill. If you're like, hey, doc, this guy is fucked up, I need you right now.
Sure.
Much different.
Mm-hmm. And the big thing about with like things with personnel is that, and there's a few points to this. One, unfortunately, when it comes to like recruiting and stuff, when you're trying to recruit medical personnel, as a guy that works in the fire service, I hate to break it to everybody, but firemen are extremely lazy creatures. And you're not going to get much to any firemen, EMTs, and paramedics to join a community organization because a lot of them just don't care. They're just like everybody else with other jobs. They just don't care enough, or they're not committed enough. They don't see the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. So you're not. It's hard to get those guys, and those are the guys you want in your community groups. Those are guys that touch patients regularly. Those are guys that hopefully are decent EMS providers, and can really do you some good. But it's hard recruiting medical personnel.
It is
because they don't, and a lot of them don't want to just do that on the side for fun when they already do that as a job.
Right. And I'm odd. Like I love this shit. Like
Oh, I love it.
I consider it like my craft. And if
Mm-hmm.
I'm not good at something, it drives me up the freaking wall.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm always aggressively trying to learn more, but
Mm-hmm.
finding that in guys is tough. The best luck I've had is honestly through church.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
if you guys have a solid foundation on something to build from,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe you go to church and like there's a nurse that wants to go to Bible study or whatever. If it's a guy, even better. They're probably more likely to want to go shooting or something.
Mm-hmm.
And they may not be super into this right now, but if something happens and you have a good relationship with them, then the water isn't boiling, right? Like we saw the water start to get turned up in 2020 and guys were coming out, they're getting more serious about training. I think we kind of touched on this. That's why you're seeing this progression now 5 years later.
Mm-hmm.
But when that water does get cranked up, I think you're going to see a lot of guys come out like, holy shit, this isn't good. And most guys don't store any food.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, well, I have some rations set aside that I intended to hand out to key personnel. You fit that criteria because you're a PA or an MD or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I need you to work in this clinic.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect, but finding guys that, want to be about it on a consistent basis is, it's a diamond in the rough sometimes.
Yeah. Veterans is a good place.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they're motivated, again, a lot of veterans are actually really lazy.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you find some really squared away veterans, like our ex-Army medic, and I forget which title he had. Super motivated guy. Since he's been out of the Army, he's stayed up on top of everything. And he even said it to me a couple months after he got involved with us, at the local organization level. He's like, I missed being doc. Like doing all these little hip pocket classes and, going through guys' IFACs with him and just doing this kind of stuff. He's like, I missed this. Like this is what I like.
Yeah. And it's, it's camaraderie. It's brotherhood, right? Like do hard things with your friends together.
Now, if you start getting a little bit of a crowd of medical personnel, a big thing I tell to guys is use your more advanced medical personnel to bring up the skill level of the lower medical personnel, because you're gonna have a lot more success with that than taking the guy who's a welder on a normal basis and trying to bring him to your level. If you have a paramedic in the group and a really young, inexperienced EMT joins, that EMT at least has some level of base to build upon.
Mm-hmm.
And even just once a month getting with that guy and just doing an extra hour of training and stuff with him, you bring that guy up to a higher, more capable level. You can teach EMTs to be decent field medics and do the basics of, establishing access, airway management, and, minor fluids and medications just from that small base that you're not going to be able to do with other guys.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that's the job of the, call them whatever you want, your most senior medical person, your chief medical officer, whatever it is. That's his job, is to train up the younger guys. Like, I mean, realistically, you're not going to have a standing army. Most guys are lucky to have something that looks like an ODA.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry if that acronym for guys that don't know, like an operational detachment, like a special forces group. So you've got like your comms guy, you have a junior and a senior. Med, you've got a junior and a senior medic. And I think for most guys, that's more what you're going to be able to do. Mm-hmm. But the beautiful thing about, these preparedness groups or whatever you want to call them, there's no scope. Mm-hmm. Like, a couple days ago, I have an EMT that hangs out with us. We were doing lines on people, like showing them how to do it. Yeah. One of them didn't go so well, but that's fine. That's part of the process. Like it infiltrates, and hey, it's all right. You were a little too steep in the angle. Drop the angle, you'll be all right.
I did the same exact thing at the end of February, one of our trainings with one of our more inexperienced EMTs that has joined. That's starting to fill like a junior medic role. I was like, hey, at the end of training today, you're gonna stay after. I want you to start 3 lines. Mm-hmm. You might get all 3. You might miss all 3. But we need to, get you those reps and just put hands on quote unquote patients. And some of my guys were like, wow, I don't know if I want him to, learn to do IVs on me. I was like, if you guys want him to do IVs on you when it really matters, sit your ass in his chair and let him practice.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the first line I started was at Corps School in San Antonio. And we had a bunch of dudes from Ghana because, like, that's a pathway to citizenship. And this, they paired me with one of these dudes, black as night. I couldn't see a vein for the life of me. I was terrified. It was all by feel. And it ended up working out. But, like, you've got to get the experience somehow. Mm-hmm. And, starting a line, like, it may, like, oh, yeah, I'm hungover. They're just going to give me some fluids. Like, okay, that's one. Or you can get a line and use one of those saline locks, and I can stick a needle in there and I can draw a unit off of you. Mm-hmm. So if he's good enough to do that, that saves me, something's going to take me 60 to 90 seconds. Mm-hmm. That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a lot that can be done in house. And you talked about kind of protocols or oversight a second ago. The two big things that I've really pushed towards more recently with our local medical guys is that, one, we do have protocols on our share drive for guys to reference, but obviously nobody's tied to anything. And another thing we probably should have talked about this a little earlier in the show, is that if you are not working under a medical director or for a direct agency and you're doing any type of, especially ALS care, make sure it's either A, on guys that you absolutely trust that will not sue you for doing life-saving measures, but it's also kind of like a, again, shitty whatever doomsday fantasy we're going to talk about style scenario. If you're doing like a community disaster response, and even say you're certified, say you live in whatever, let's just say Tennessee, and there's a tornado in Arkansas, and you and 10 buddies go over to Arkansas to help with some sort of disaster response. Don't just start running around and doing ALS skills on people, even if they need it, because we still live in a civil society where there's a lot of legality tied into everything.
It's a very litigious society.
Unless someone from like EMA or like the state comes to you or your group leader and says, hey, the local medical provider has granted XYZ protocols to anybody with a certification since we declared a state of emergency, you're basically stuck to BLS skills, no matter how good you may be. And that's just you got to, at the end of the day, you got to protect yourself.
If you're responding to like a disaster, and I saw that when I went to East Tennessee for Helene, there was like a makeshift clinic that they had set up. But all these, nurses and whatnot, they're coming from other states that aren't compact states. Mm-hmm. So they have, they can have 50 different combinations of letters after their name. It looks really good in an email. But if there's no one to sign off on this and you're not authorized, like, no, you can't do it.
That's one thing I have talked about with during a fall meeting last year, towards the end of last year, with one of my local EMA directors was, as a 2025 project, as I build the relations between our organization and local EMA and other officials for this type of the conversation, was getting with whoever EMA uses as a medical director and trying to work towards gaining some level of an umbrella for coverage and guidance for my guys. Not only is that great for the official capacity for any organization, but it also protects your medical personnel that are, volunteering to try and do something good.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if we're talking crazy doomsday prepper, roving bandits, raping Chinese paratroopers scenario, all of that's pretty much out the window, at least for a while.
Yeah, and I've got a buddy who, when we're like, well, what are we training for? Like, what level do we want to be at? And he's like, I want to be ready for intergalactic space rapists. If I can deal with that, I can dial it back.
That's true. That's very true.
Okay. All right. If you have the capability and you just need to dial it back, awesome. But if the time comes where you need to crank it up, you've never gone that far and pushed that hard. Mm-hmm. It's tough to find that when you need it.
100%. But yeah, so back to kind of the paperwork side of things, because I think this is important for, organizations that are trying to do legitimate good work. Mm-hmm. I personally have 2 documents on our share drive for our medics to reference. It is our area's protocols that cover all of the fire and EMS districts for both the EMT and the paramedic level. So it's a 300-page something document for everything and everything that they do. And then we also have the most up-to-date version of the full TCCC guidelines. So not just your basic buddy aid, but all the way to like what is supposed to cover like corpsman and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And, I go to my guys and I'm like, we have no official protocols, but I'm like, this is what I want us to look at, because there are people much smarter than all of us that have sat down and wrote all of this for us. So I was like, this is what we use. And that's just my personal preference on what we have done.
Yeah. I think the TCCC protocols are, they work. We know they work. If you're in some kind of situation like Ukraine, you're going to have to change your tactics, but the medicine kind of remains the same.
Yeah.
Prolonged casualty care is huge. Like, we're going beyond, we talk a lot about blood, but we're going, Foley management, monitoring ins and outs, documenting. Nobody wants to document. Even nurses hate documenting.
Chart.
Yeah, but it really helps. And when you're setting up a clinic or something like that, like, man, I tell guys all the time, like, get a bunch of SF 600 forms, just those blank chronological records of care from the Department of Defense. They're free, they're online, and just have them stored up and use that so you can, you're going to have to sleep at some point. You can hand off to whoever's coming on shift and they have a record of what you did. Nobody likes documentation, but it's a huge thing. Crew medical records, like, is someone a diabetic? Is someone asthmatic? Someone, have an anaphylactic reaction to bees? Like, that's shit you need to know before you're going out doing something.
As much as, we try to protect OPSEC at the community volunteer level, you should definitely have stored somewhere secure, some level of personnel files. And if you're like a 5-man group, it doesn't need to be like that serious. But if you're talking like 20 plus guys, like, starting to get into a larger organization, having personnel files with not just their basic information, but, like we said, like blood type, allergies, previous medical history. Medical history is a huge one.
Yep.
We've got, one guy in our group who's got 1.5 lungs, essentially.
It's good to know.
That's good to know. From operations he's had earlier in his life. Do you have diabetics?
I'm going to go listen to lung sounds. Like, this doesn't sound right. Why doesn't this sound right?
Why is there no sound here? So there's a lot of that stuff that, you should know and you should keep on file. One of the other big things, kind of administratively that I've done, and I actually just finished it about a month ago, since I've got, a fewer guys medical wise on board now, is continuing education, which is a huge thing. Because it's one thing for your guys to show up and practice IVs and teach March to the other guys, but they need to progress themselves. So what I did was created a 12-month training calendar and did 1.5 to 2 hours of continuing education per month. And it's split up into the same categories that NREMT does. Not the same hours, but the same categories.
Okay, I like that.
And it's not quite as much trauma focused as some people might like it to think, but all of our training revolves around trauma. So a lot of this continuing education, regardless of their provider level, looks at respiratory, looks at operations, looks at, all of the other aspects of medical and clinical care. Because as, medical providers, in a sense, we have to look past just tactical trauma care. You are also an asset to your community for the elderly with respiratory issues, pediatric care, like all of this other stuff where you may actually have to help as a community resource.
Yeah.
And that's stuff that these guys aren't seeing when they go to training with all these military age males, 18 to, say 50, when we're talking about, guys that have simulated, blast injuries or gunshot wounds. What are you going to do for that pediatric patient, that has a seal cough, that seal bark, that somebody just brought to your little base of operations during some sort of community, disaster?
Yeah. And I run a class called the Clinician, and it's basic clinical skills. Like, it's open enrollment. I encourage healthcare workers not to do it because a lot of it's repetitive, but it's like, how do you take a blood pressure? What do the numbers mean? what is your pulse ox? And then we get all the way through by day 2. I'm having them run a sick call, and it's super resource heavy. Like they're constantly referencing like a Merck manual, the EMRA guides, your urgent care guides, your antibiotic guides. But I give them a patient, I give them a set of vitals, and I let them run with it. And I answer yes or no questions. But like, yeah, the trauma stuff is cool and sexy. It's like, it's the 1R1s of medicine. Like it looks cool and it's hot. But like, what's really going to generate goodwill in the community? Like if a dude brings a screaming child to you who has a raging UTI, if you can fix that, you guarantee that dude's going to come over and fix your generator.
Oh yeah. There's so much. Yeah. And that's what I'm always driving home to my guys is that, being that community volunteer medic goes so much more than just the boys. Especially like when you look at like the Hurricane Helene response, those guys that were there within those first 10 days or less, guys that were past the line of disaster for people who ran out of oxygen at home, had diabetic issues, you had developed different types of diseases and all that kind of stuff, and just need that either basic, you're triaging people and prioritizing transport, or just minorly stabilizing people in the field to the best of your ability, depending on supply and logistics. Like that, there's zero trauma really involved in any of that. It's everything else.
Yeah, and it's a huge undertaking, man. Like the medical side, like comms. Yeah, comms is a lot, but 1 or 2 guys, you can get away with comms. Medicine, man, is just. That's just the treating people. That's not even the logistics on how to acquire, store, organize. It's just so much.
And that was the next thing I want to dive into is, supply and logistics, and then also infrastructure. Before today's episode, and this was completely unplanned, it just happened to be where I was at my project list. And I'm looking at them right now. I have 4 27-gallon totes stacked across from my desk, and it's all of our mass casualty tubs. Basically tubs we utilize for like rapid CCP deployment and stuff like that. And I had just shit everywhere on the floor. And I was relabeling bins and recounting stuff and putting things into different order and stuff. I mean, it was just everywhere. So I really want to dive into the supply and logistics side, because you can have all of the knowledge in the world, but if you have 1 round of decent medical equipment and 0 reserve, you're set up for failure. So I'll let you dive into that a little bit if you want, because you do a lot of that kind of stuff, like on Instagram, talking about supply and logistics and just showing pictures of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, logistics wins wars, man. Like the amount of stuff you're going to need is far greater than one guy can acquire. So the way I come at it is like the IFAC approach, right? I'm giving you the IFAC. I'm coming up to use your IFAC on you. That's your supplies. So like when we build them out, like I size the NPAs or the nasal airways to the guy. So like all the contents are the same. They're all standard across the board. Sizes might be a little different though. So if I include like pill packs in their IFACs, so like something for pain, whether it's they have leftover something special from dental surgery, or if they have we'll give them like Tylenol ER, and then like an antibiotic. So the antibiotic I'll use Augmentin for most people. It's a pretty good broad coverage antibiotic. But if you're allergic to amoxicillin, I'm not going to give that to you. We'll change it up. But the IFAC principle for all this stuff, I hand out a list of all the over-the-counters, the wound care stuff, the first aid supplies, and I give it to the guys. And it's their responsibility. If they have questions, I'm happy to help them. But you need to square you and your family away. And ideally, what would happen is you telehealth me. You say, this is what I've got. What do I do? And I tell you to go into X bin and use this. Because I can't, I'm only one guy. I can't store everything for a whole crew.
Oh, yeah. Logistics is crazy, man. Believe me.
Yeah.
I understand.
Even just if let's say you've got, Bezos, fuck you money, like the amount of room it takes up is just insane. So that's their responsibility. That's what I've found to be most effective. So you've got the IFAC stuff for them and their families. Then if you guys want to get into community outreach, hearts and minds, whether it's like disaster response or, the Green Berets, man, they went out and did hearts and minds missions all the time, and medical is like at the top of the list of what they would do in these villages.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's something that's on your radar of, maybe we will do hearts and minds, that supplies is separate.
Mm-hmm.
So figure out what your goal is with it and build to that. But if you really want to get, stuff that's effective, it's not super expensive for the gauze and, the tape and all that stuff. But when you're talking about needing like rounds of antibiotics, there's still some places where you can get the bird and fish antibiotics. And if you don't have it, I highly encourage, it's called the EMRA, Echo Mike Romeo Alpha Antibiotic Guide. And that is like every brand new nurse practitioner or PA carries that around in their pocket. And if you're being treated at an urgent care, there's like a 90% chance you're being treated based off of that book or off of Up to Date, which is like a medical Wikipedia for healthcare providers. But if you want to stock up on that stuff, you're going to need to make friends. You're going to need an NPI, like a provider number, to order that stuff. And the best luck I've had with that is through churches. And, I work in healthcare, so I have friends who are on board and in the right direction. And I started a medical training company. So now when I order, 5 bottles of Augmentin or whatever to the house, like, oh, that's just for training. So you can stock depth that way. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of guys will get the basics, but then they're just, they kind of run out of like, well, I need a doctor to order any of this other stuff. Like, yeah, you do.
Yeah.
But that's where, building relationships, and it takes time for sure. But if you can get that, you can get the bird and fish antibiotics, you can do the Jace medical approach. But yeah, you're going to need medications. There's the whole holistic side, oils and all that stuff. I'm not super well versed in it. I've got friends that are, look at that as a possible alternative. Mm-hmm. But you're going to need friends.
We have personally built out a pretty good system around over-the-counter medications. But,
Mm-hmm.
As both you and I know, over-the-counter medications are, good for some routine care and stuff like that. Not as much emergency care, depending on what it is. But it kind of goes back to brilliance in BLS, is that before you get to trying to make doctor friends and getting IV fluids and different types of ALS medications and stuff, you should have a very good understanding of how to effectively use over-the-counter medications, because they are a powerful tool. When you go to the ER and like you want like a minor pain management, like they're just giving you Tylenol. Like
and charging you $65 for a pill.
Yeah, they're not giving you anything fancy.
Yeah. Understanding how to utilize the stuff you have available, huge.
Mm-hmm.
Huge.
And unfortunately, I wish there was a better way around it, and I understand why it is the way that it is. But things like ALS drugs and IV fluids and stuff like that, it's just so heavily regulated. I wish it wasn't, because I think sometimes it does more harm than good. I wish they would at least lower the threshold of being able to purchase that kind of stuff, because I've looked into it many times. I am a paramedic. I own a gear and medical company. I resell for North American Rescue. I do a bunch of other stuff, and I have contacted, I bet you, a dozen medical companies that sell medications and IV fluids and all that kind of stuff, trying to start programs where I'm building out med bags for like SWAT medics, Minuteman medics, like stuff like that. And they won't even sell it to me as a business without a physician license.
Yep.
It's
that magical NPI number, man.
Yeah, but there's just no way around it, unfortunately.
No, there's not. And I think, I wish it was, I understand to a certain point, like antimicrobial resistance and all that, with just taking that random bottle of pills you had, left over from dental surgery for your, whether it's amoxicillin or whatever it is, and just using that for every little ailment. I understand where they're coming from, but I wish it was a little bit more like Mexico. You can walk up and get a bottle of Keflex or something. Like, it's not the end of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. However, when it comes to supply and logistics, as as much of a barrier as money is, and medical equipment is a money pit.
Yes, it is.
Once you get outside of just bulk storing like 4x4s and, tourniquets, medical equipment's expensive. AEDs with a single set of adult pads, $600 to $1,000 depending on where you get one from, and that's a refurbished one. Then you gotta buy pediatric pads for $150, and that's just an AED.
Yeah.
That's used nothing crazy.
So I had a kid this last year, and I'm not super like kid-ish. I was never like a super big fan of kids. Now I love my kid to death. I think it's the best thing ever. But like terrified new dad, and we had a bunch of FSA money that was going to expire, so we bought an AED with it.
That's awesome. That's how we bought our first AED.
Yeah, use the tools that you have. So like FSA money, HSA money, stuff like that, to make some of these purchases. Like, yeah, absolutely. Like especially with FSA, because that doesn't roll over. Like, I mean, if the money is just going to go to waste, like you can buy a lot of medical equipment with FSA funds.
Group funds or group donations are a great thing. If you're a person that's working on your preparedness and you buy a box of 4x4s, buy 2 boxes of 4x4s, donate one to the group, and then put it in a 27-gallon tote and put it in someone's house, put it in someone's garage. Obviously, if it's something temperature sensitive, it has to be stored indoors, which is a whole other logistical problem.
Yeah, it is.
When we're talking about space. But there's a lot that can be done on that kind of stuff, and we could probably talk for more than an hour on all of the things guys should store in large bulks. And if you're a medical personnel guy that's listening to this, you probably already know what needs to be bought in bulk. But it's important that you guys listening to this start working towards that, because there's no magical logistics that's just going to show up whenever anything bad happens. Like, what you put away now is what you have till you either make some damn good friends later or just magically come across stuff.
Yeah, and I think we need to, figure out who's in your group and have a realistic discussion of what the highest level of care you think you're going to provide is. For me, I think it's not unreasonable to expect to be able to run an urgent care. I think that's about where the ceiling is. If you're someone who has an MD in the group, like, go hog wild. If he's in the group, use his NPI number and buy whatever you guys need. But urgent care, a lot of it is just the basics, like doing wound care, doing stitches, doing basic orthopedic care, like, sprains, maybe a minor fracture or something like that. Like, if dental offices, like your buddy's wife is a dental tech at the local office, like, you guys now have access to an x-ray machine. If you guys know a chiropractor, you now have access to an x-ray machine. So, like, you got to think outside of the box a little bit. Vet clinics, chiropractors, dental offices.
Vets are huge. Hell, I wish I could buy lactated ringers off Chewy, but I still need a vet number for that.
Yeah. But I mean, vets, they have most things, and at least where I'm at in Idaho, a lot of the vets are along the same mindset.
Yeah.
So you're much more likely to utilize a vet for a lot of things. And vets are wild, dude. Like, they do surgery themselves. There's no, like, they're not referring you to a surgeon. They do the surgery in the clinic. So they've got some wild stuff. But figure out kind of what you think you can do. And for the most part, I think urgent care is, generally speaking, like, if we were to throw open the doors and be like, hey, we're seeing patients today, I think urgent care is where it's at.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty realistic.
Yeah, and you can prevent a lot of infection with, like, good wound care. So now we may not need the antibiotics if you guys did it right.
Yeah.
So trying to avoid some of those more hard to get, complex interventions just by doing those basics. Getting back to the brilliance in the basics, man.
Brilliance in the basics, for sure. And that also goes to the point of, as the medical, personnel within your organization, whether it's 2 guys or whether it's, 6 guys, doing education with your guys, again, on the small stuff. It's like saying, hey, change your socks is in fact important, so you don't get different types of rash on your feet that then eventually become infected, which then take you off the line. If you all could have been prevented if you just change your socks every 8 to 12 hours. Like a lot of that stuff, you can just teach to your guys. Like if you're a medic assigned to a squad or a platoon or something, if we're in a group big enough to have that type of conversation, hey guys, change your socks. If you get cuts from a barbed wire fence or some sort of timber or something like that, once you get to the patrol base, make sure it gets bandaged up. If you're not feeling well, make sure you come see me. Like just doing simple stuff with your guys not only develops relations as doc, but protects your guys and eliminates the need for that higher supply and logistics.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing an FTX over the summer, and we had a long halt, and I was like, all right, you guys pull 50% security, the other 50%, you guys are changing your socks, powdering your feet. And they looked at me like I was crazy, and I'm like, no, I'm serious. And one dude, I guess he hadn't broken in his boots, and he started to get a hot spot. So a little thing like that, if you let it go and he just kind of, muscles through it, maybe that becomes infected. Now that's streaking up his leg. Now you're looking at you're looking at sepsis and all sorts of crazy shit that could have just been avoided by, they make fun of corpsmen. Change your socks, take some Motrin, drink water, right? Like, yeah, just change your socks. And we avoided that whole scenario.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, one of my biggest personal goals for my local group to invest in, because we're looking at group property right now and wanting to put up like an administrative building.
Hell yeah.
Is I need a compressor to fill air cylinders, oxygen tanks. It's not that out of the realm of possibilities as far as financial stuff goes, but just having the ability to fill oxygen tanks and send them off in vehicles, or put a small one like put a small cylinder in your medic's vehicle pack, a larger extension pack to his personal pack. Like, just, I'm a big oxygen guy. I think oxygen can fix a lot. I think that's just one of those like kind of clinical care steps that you can take that's more than reasonable, that really beefs up your own infrastructure.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I've always kind of just relied on concentrators, but that's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah. Compressor, concentrator, something like that. Something you can fill, your, because you can buy oxygen. Most people don't know. You can just buy oxygen tanks online. Like, they're not that expensive. And, again, you go back to that, hearts and minds thing. Hey, third squad, you guys are going to do a run into town today, and out there by the grocery store, Doc's going to set up, a little tent or something, and people are going to be able to come by and see Doc. And some kid, some dad brings in his kid that's been having asthma issues recently. You give them a little, little albuterol treatment, a little oxygen. They start to feel better. It's like, hey, I'll remember that.
Yep. And that's how you get that the support of the local populace, man. It's not conventional, conventional military. Like, you really have to be thinking outside of the box and looking at what specifically like the special forces mission is, because I think that's something that you're much more likely to run into.
Yeah.
But a lot of this, like, preventative medicine, man, PrevMed is huge. Like, there's a whole NEC or like job classification for corpsmen to go into preventative medicine. And under preventative medicine, like your sanitation, like, are you washing your hands? Like, it sounds stupid. Everyone has it beaten into their head. But I swear to God, if someone takes a crap and doesn't wash their hands and they go and cook food, now everyone's hosed. Like, I can do like fluid management for a couple people, but like if the whole crew is eating this nasty spaghetti, dude, that's a serious problem. And that's where you're starting to run into, these dehydration fatalities that you saw with like, Spanish flu and whatever. Yeah. It wasn't so much the flu that killed them. It's the fact that they couldn't keep fluids in and they couldn't replace them. So, like, washing your hands. I don't know how many times I have to beat it into people. Like, wash your damn hands. Like, how do you get rid of waste? Like, how far away from, where you're cooking should your latrine be?
Yeah.
Food and water. Like, water is huge. Like, until I went to Helene, over in East Tennessee, like water was always just kind of like a footnote. Like, yeah, I've got a grill filter. Like, I'm fine. Okay, now do that for a community. Like,
Yeah.
oh shit.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much to tackle with that. The amount of people, the amount of grown ass adults that don't wash their damn hands, even just after taking a piss.
Mm-hmm.
Because even in the field, let's say like I'm just taking a piss. I don't need to wash my hands. I don't need to get that hand sanitizer out of my pack and just, do a little, routine self care here. Even though you've got, ball cheese, in your crotch from after you just got done doing a 10-mile ruck to the patrol base that you're now set up at, and now you just, messed around with yourself, and now you're going to go eat chow and rub your face and put your fingers in your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Wash your damn hands, people.
Yeah. Now you're taking supplies away from, whatever you guys have stored up so that I can treat these things.
Mm-hmm.
When you could have just washed your hands and we would avoid this whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
everybody should carry hand sanitizer in their packs, in their food packs.
Yeah, they should. I keep it in my med bag. I keep it in my pocket. Like, it doesn't take much.
Mm-mm.
But like the water thing, like, until you've been in a scenario where you're like, yeah, the faucet works, but I know it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it doesn't really hit home until then. At least it didn't for me. But I mean, we were staying at a dude's house and we flew into Knoxville, and they were like, 50 miles away from the affected area, and all the neighbors are getting sick.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, I have a grail. I can drink out of that. Like, yeah. And that worked really well. But like, what are you going to do for multiple people? Like, what is your water plan?
Yeah.
And, like I think Cana Provisions is like the name in water right now.
Mm-hmm.
And, guys will just click off of that. I'm going to go watch another LPVO video. It's like, holy shit. The number of problems that bad water has caused, the number of people it has killed throughout human history is insane. And it takes a lot of supplies to manage someone who is sick from dirty water.
Even here in the United States recently, there's been a lot of large areas that have been put under like boil water notices and stuff. I can remember very specifically back to that big snowstorm the East Coast had at the end of January. There was like an entire tri-state, I think it was like Richmond, Virginia, where they were under a boil notice for like 6 or 7 days because the winter storm had come through and completely taken the water treatment facilities offline because the power shut off, but the backup power was either under maintenance or was like not hooked up at the time for whatever reason. So then all the filter systems and all of that for the whole city was down, and it turned into this giant thing. And it's like 6 days in, you're still in a boil water notice. By the way, there's 14 inches of snow outside.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, yeah, it's more common than people think. It doesn't have to be a disaster zone or a tactical nightmare to have to worry about where am I getting clean water.
Yeah, I mean, we had a storm come through here in the fall and knocked out power. And yet we have gravity-fed water from where our water plant's at. I don't know if their generator's working. Like, it's gravity-fed. Like, it's going to come down regardless. I don't know if it's working. Mm-hmm. So all the water, like, my kid wants water. That has to go through a filter now. And, then you start, I'm working on this whole, like, I wanted to do a short article on it, and then it turned into 30 pages.
Yeah, dude, story of my life. I understand.
I'm like, holy shit. But when I wanted to get into water, there was no, like, chart or graph. Like, I'm trying to get rid of X particulate. This product over here gets rid of that. Like, so I tried to make that, and, it's still a work in progress. But, like, are you worried about bacteria, protozoa? Like, yeah, okay, that's like a Sawyer filter.
Yeah.
Are you worried about viruses? That's a whole separate ball of wax. Yeah. Are you worried about, like, chemicals and lead in the water? Like, up here, there's a ton of dredging that happened. So, yeah, like, those chemicals are real.
We made an internal organization SOP just over water. And it's a document that basically outlines, one, here's all of the products that we've tested and recommended. From small filters to large-scale filters, different types of electronic equipment, chemical tablets. Like, these are things we trust. Here's a list of the recommended gear that you should look at. And then there was also a flow chart that basically said, You know, it was like if water comes from this source, do this to the water, or blah 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 blah. And then we tiered the different levels of water into 3 different tiers. And it was basically like a field use, like limited use, you know, acceptability of water treatment, and then a mid tier where it was like you can do it for this, this, and this, but don't do it for this. And then there was like the top tier where it was like, all right, this level is safe for all applications because it's went through all of these filtration and cleaning steps.
Yeah, I just wanted something super simple, like, you know, Daddy, tell me what to buy. Like,
and that's basically it's only 4 pages. It's like, here's a gear list, here's how to do it, make water.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'll shoot you the little flow chart that I've got going.
Yeah, dude, send me that.
But yeah, like just brilliance in the basics, man. Like just water. Like it doesn't take a rocket scientist. You can have a water boss, and he's in charge of the water.
Last thing I want to talk about, and we'll wrap this up, is clinical care and expectations still in that community mindset. And what I'm kind of referencing to more here is the reality of capabilities of hospitals, because most people just think, oh, there's a hospital, it fixes everything. and don't realize that hospitals and just various medical facilities are in a tier system on what their capabilities are, and some hospitals have specific specialties, so on, so forth. For example, it's not really a secret because it's on my Instagram, but I live in northern Kentucky, which is in the Cincinnati tri-state. For the entire tri-state, there is 2 trauma facilities, UC Cincinnati and UC Children's, which are in the heart of downtown Cincinnati. Northern Kentucky has no trauma facilities. Southeast Indiana has no trauma facilities. The north side of the Cincinnati tri-state in southwest Ohio has no trauma facilities. So if you think you're just going to take your gunshot wound buddy up to the local ER that's there for, you know, essentially routine and basic emergency surgery and, you know, just basic nursing care, you've got a whole new thing coming to you.
Yeah, and this needs to, well, I guess, so we'll kind of define what you're talking about. So as far as I'm aware, these are the designations. So level that goes 1 through 5. Mm-hmm. So 5 is basically a urgent care that hands out opiates and has a CT machine. Mm-hmm. That's, you know, they're trying to stabilize you until they can get you out. Like I have a level 5 in my very small town here. Like Lifelike comes in all the time because they just can't manage anything.
Yeah.
Then you're going to work your way all the way up to a level 1. Level 1s are, they A, have to be a teaching hospital, and B, they have to have every specialty either in-house or available immediately on call. Mm-hmm. So like when I worked at a level 1, if they had like a pediatric cardiology patient come in, there had to be a pediatric cardiology specialist, and they would come down and they would see the patient and tell us what they wanted to do with them. So ideally you would go to a level 1, but those are usually in your major metropolitan areas. Mm-hmm. So you're doing good if you can get a 3 or a 2. Mm-hmm. Most towns of about 75,000 or so have a level 2. Mm-hmm. And they can do most things, mm-hmm. right? Like they can do pretty much everything a level 1 does, but they don't have the teaching. They're not affiliated with a school, and they may not have every single specialty in-house. Mm-hmm. So your 2s are, you know, you're good to go if you go to a 2.
I would say most people are probably, unless you live in a very busy metropolitan area, most people are looking at level 3s and 4s. If you're out in the back-ass country, you're looking at a level 5 that's probably in a network of like a level 3 that's maybe like 30 minutes away. Like if you're living in a county of 8,000 people, you probably have a level 4 or maybe a level 5 out there, but you're getting air care somewhere. Mm-hmm. I think that I haven't got to talk to a lot of extended hospital staff on this kind of stuff. I don't think it would be a far-fetched idea to say that in the event that things kind of went downhill nationwide or at least regional-wide, you would see hospital networks kind of adapt and change to some extent. But that doesn't change the fact that, your general surgery physician is not a trauma specialist, surgeon. It's like taking someone to the cath lab and being like, all right, please fix this guy's gunshot wound to the femoral artery. It's like, what do you want me to do? So the capability is potentially there, but it's going to take a lot of reshaping and kind of, unfortunately, last minute decisions to do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, when you do your area study, you should have a big old map. You go to MyTopo, you get a custom made map of your area. You can get the acetate covers if you want to do it, old school, and mark out where all these facilities are, what their designations are, and what's in your area. So like whenever we do an FTX or whatever as a part of the op-board planning process, I'm listing out how far away, whether it's an urgent care for someone like rolled their ankle or whatever, how far away the trauma centers are, where the local fire departments are with EMS. So we have a rough idea of, if X happens, this is where we're going. It's already predetermined. Mm-hmm. So you should have that locked down. But with the facilities are only as good as the people that show up and the supplies they have. Mm-hmm. And they burn through a lot of supplies a day.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And during COVID, I just left the level 1 I was working at, and I went to an urgent care, which that was a shit show. But we had to close the urgent care for multiple days in a row because people called out because they thought it was the end of the world and they had to feed their families. So they were like in line at Costco. Mm-hmm. So the healthcare workers are just people, and they're going to take care of their family long before they ever give two shits about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Most people don't realize it's a lot like the grocery stores. Hospitals run on like a 24 to 48 hour supply and logistics chain. If no trucks came to your local level 3s and above for like 36 hours, that hospital's going into like DEFCON.
Yeah, that's being generous too.
And that's being generous.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into it because they may, you may have some supplies, but if like central processing that sterilizes everything you need for your chest tubes and whatnot, if they're offline because they can't get, one little thing that's needed for their sterilizers, they don't have anything. There's no hospital plan to boil the instruments. Mm-hmm. They're very locked in on what they do. And while some do have these emergency management plans, it's an afterthought. Like I do the emergency management for my organization, and I'm, kind of tied in with the county as a result of it. Mm-hmm. There's, they don't really have a plan.
Just, no.
We hope for the best, and Godspeed.
Yeah, and this takes absolutely nothing away from EMS or hospital staff, but the overwhelming majority of those medical personnel are not mentally or skillfully prepared to have extreme changes in how they do business in their setting of work. If you went to almost any hospital, regardless of trauma, and was like, hey, we're changing everybody's supply and logistics chain from 24 hours to 120 hours. Everybody's on, 12s every single day, and we're going to multiply our patient intake by at least 2. Like, it would mind blow everybody in the hospital. Your 32-year-old nurse working in the ER would be like, you want us to do what? Like it would be an absolute shit show.
Yeah, it would just be, yeah.
And by the way, we're going to do this for the next 6 months because there's now a domestic conflict, or 3 years.
Yeah. After working through COVID, and just seeing how they react to, a respiratory virus, for God's sake, it's not, it's not domestic conflict. Like, holy shit! Mm-hmm. It was terrible. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons I started doing the podcast and the page and all that stuff is I don't know, it was a COO or something like that. He came in and they were trying to get the temperature of the staff. And they're like, hey, how would you guys feel if we denied services to people that didn't get their COVID shots? And I'm like, how about you go fuck yourself? But I'm like, man, I have treated people who have tried to kill me, choke me, stab me, pissed on me, threw crap on me. If I'm going to care for those people, like, yeah, I'm going to care for the family that just chose not to go along. And I was getting something out of a supply room, so logistics. But there was a couple mid-levels providers, like a couple PAs, a couple nurses, like a rad tech. And they're having like a hushed conversation, and I'm like, "Oh, what are you guys talking about?" And they knew where I stood on that stuff. And they're like, "Well, how do we care for these patients if they don't let us, see them?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "Well, do we do this out of our basements or what?" And I was like, "Holy shit! These people are talking about guerrilla medicine in a first world nation."
Mm-hmm.
And doing this, that's where the title of guerrilla came out of, is doing so without authorization of authority.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're going to do this whether you say it's okay or not. Like, we're going to do what we've been trained to do, what we know is right, and we'll figure everything else out. But yeah, I lost a lot of faith in the medical institution in the last 5 years.
I've never told this story on the on social media or anything, but during my right, it is juicy. It just kind of goes to show kind of the politics that plays into the hospitals and everything. I was doing my paramedic time in one of the local cath labs. For everybody that's listening doesn't know, when you go through paramedic school, you have to do a certain amount of hours in all these different specialty units within a hospital on top of all of your ER time that you have to do.
And the nurses like you a lot more if you show up with snacks.
Yes, snacks and change bedding without complaining. So I went up for my cath lab time, and they put me into scrubs, and they were all wearing short sleeve scrubs, so I put on a short sleeve scrub, and the director for the cath lab was in there one day, and the senior nurse that was walking me around, first thing in the morning, I only had to be there for like 4 hours. She's walking me around or whatever, and the director very rudely kind of came up to me and this senior nurse and was like, "Do you want to introduce me to this young man?" And she was like, "Oh, this is Jeremy, so-and-so, blah, blah. He's here for paramedic time today. The cath lab director shook my hand. He was like, "Nice to meet you. Jeremy, I'm going to be very honest with you. I find you quite offensive." I was like, what the hell is this guy talking about? I was like, what the hell is this guy talking about? I was like, "Excuse me, sir?" And he was like, "Do you have long sleeves or something that you can put on?" I was like, I do not. He's like, "Well, your tattoos are going to need to be covered up while you're here." Anybody that follows me on YouTube knows that Malone Lave is on my right forearm and Six Emperor Tyrannus is on my left forearm. And I look around, and there's tons of other people with like sleeve tattoos. There was this one, big buff black guy that was in there who had like skulls and explosions and like all other types of shit and like a full left arm sleeve, but he was wearing short sleeves.
Well, he was black, so.
I was like, what the hell? I was like, all these people have tattoos exposed. And he called my paramedic school director and said that it was unacceptable that I showed up to my clinical with right-wing militia tattoos. So, if you think everybody in the hospital is on your side, or even very well educated just because they're a doctor, you're not correct at all.
No, that gets down the whole rabbit hole of the American education system and the radicalization and all the wild shit that's been going on in there. And it's the more educated people are, the crazier they seem to become.
Mm-hmm. And I had no issues. Like, I never saw that director again after that conversation, and I didn't argue with him. I was like, I gotta be here for 4 hours, whatever. I went and put on a long sleeve scrub shirt. Said my yes sirs, no sirs, thanks for having me, guys. Went along my day. Called my instructor after I got out of that clinical time, and I was like, hey, you might get a phone call or something at some point in time. And he was like, don't worry, they already sent an email about you. I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah. So. I got into a pretty competitive program, and they were, for some reason, Idaho, I love this state. I think it's the best state in the union. I think it's, the last little tidbits of America, Idaho, and a couple other states.
Unless you go to the park.
lets you go to a park
during COVID.
And from what I heard of that story, though, the cop that did that, he ended up with like signs on his front yard, like mandates aren't worth your life, and that problem resolved itself. So I'm here for that. But the tattoo policy was like no visible tattoos, and the program directors were like laughing, saying that like, yeah, we made so and so who had tattoos wear a turtleneck in like 100-degree weather. And I'm like, hang on, time out. I've seen more covered nurses and doctors and rest techs save lives than non-tattooed ones. Like if you go to insert local trauma center where I used to work, they're covered in head to toe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like that doesn't dictate how good you are at your job. And they're like, it's unprofessional. I'm like, what's unprofessional is a nurse who sucks with no tattoos and you die. Like I'd rather give me the one that's in Crocs covered in tattoos. I know they're about that life.
Oh yeah. Oh man. Politics is in every field, unfortunately.
It is, yeah. Healthcare and the education system, I think, kind of go hand in hand, and it's pretty bad. But Idaho's been pushing back on a lot of that stuff, so it's been an interesting time to be in it. But yeah,
Jay, I appreciate you coming on, man. This is almost 2 hours, so this has been a long episode, but I think it's been a very good episode. I think we've had a lot of productive conversation.
I think so, man. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Where can guys find you, follow your social media, so on and so forth?
I'm super bad at promoting myself, but so the Guerrilla Medic, Guerrilla, I think. Guerrilla, like the Sandinista guerrillas. The Guerrilla Medic.
There's 2 R's for everybody that was listening.
Yeah. The Guerrilla Medic on Instagram, if I'm not shadow banned for saying fuck the FDA or something like that. And then I've got YouTube. So YouTube channel the content is starting to get better. Some of the older stuff is a little rough, but that's the kind of the journey we do with this stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the first videos I did was the rolling urgent care. It's like a rolling tote system. Mm-hmm. So when I say, I think an urgent care is realistic. Like I kind of run you through like the rolling, it's like a Milwaukee system. But yeah, I try to put up videos, as time allows. Podcast, the Guerrilla Medic podcast. I don't put out a whole lot of episodes. I try to, have something to say. I'm personally not a huge fan of like the 10-minute episodes and they just blast them like every 3 days. Mm-hmm. But yeah, trying to get into that and then juggling that all with a job and a kid. And this past year, the kid's kind of taken priority and I don't regret that at all. So. No.
Family always comes first, man. Well, like I said, man, thanks for coming on. I'm definitely going to get offline with you about some just running ideas past each other and stuff. You mentioned some stuff in here that has completely slipped my mind. I've been making some notes while we've been going along. So I'll chat with you some more offline, and then hopefully it finds its way over to Instagram on one of our pages, and we can bully everyone into being better medics.
I hope so. All right. Appreciate you having me, man.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you. All right, guys, that's all I have for episode 39, Tactical Medicine and Evolution. As always, train hard, train often.
Tell me turn it down and I'ma only turn up louder. Call me what you wanna, but you can't call me no coward. Strength in numbers, we the people, still the ones with power. Fighting fire with fire, time to take back what is ours. Tell me turn it down and I'ma